She didn't slam the door. That's what stuck with me, more than anything else. Just a quiet, deliberate closing click, like someone sealing off a room they no longer plan to visit. She called it her Freedom Week, said it with a half smile over coffee, like it was something couples did now. Just time for myself. To breathe. To reset. The word reset caught in my throat like a fishbone. We hadn't argued. We hadn't fought. At least, nothing worth packing a duffel bag and disappearing for 7 days. I asked where she was going. She shrugged and said she hadn't decided. Maybe coastal. Maybe mountains. No plans, that's kind of the point. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She hugged me goodbye like I was a colleague. The house felt too large after she left. Too quiet. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she really was overwhelmed. Maybe this was one of those soul-searching phases Instagram kept promoting. I cleaned the kitchen, sorted laundry, scrolled photos of us from last fall, her in a red scarf, laughing on a trail in Vermont. It didn't match this woman who had just walked out with no clear return date. 3 days in, I noticed her hiking boots were gone. The same boots I used to lace for her on those autumn trails. But the weird thing was, she hadn't taken any real outdoor gear otherwise. No rain shell, no thermal pack, nothing for actual trekking. Just the boots. And the duffel bag. That's when I remembered. 2 nights before she left, she had mentioned needing to grab just a few things from the storage crawlspace. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. But the bag she packed that morning was already half full before she even reached the closet. Something about the math didn't add up. On the 5th night, I went to get a hoodie from the back of her closet. Not hers, mine. One she always stole when she was cold. I found it where I left it, but wedged behind the winter coats was another duffel. Older. Dusty but unzipped. I knew immediately she hadn't meant for me to find it. Nothing I had seen in years, along with receipts, scattered toiletries, a spare toothbrush, and a second set of car keys. Not to either of our vehicles. I turned over one receipt dated 3 days ago. Local, a cabin rental in the nearby Blue Ridge town. The charge was small but telling. 2 nights, 1 queen bed, no pet fee. I dropped the receipt. The cabin wasn't near any trails. It was the kind of place you booked for one reason, and it wasn't to find yourself. The boots made sense now. So did the sudden freedom. But I didn't storm out. I didn't call her. I didn't even mention it when she texted that night, saying she was doing okay, and hoped I was too. Instead, I poured myself a drink, sat down at the kitchen table, and made a list. Not of names, of questions, because whatever she thought this week was going to be, self-discovery, soul-searching, freedom, I was about to spend my week giving her something far more concrete. An exit plan she wouldn't forget. By the next morning, I'd already memorized the name on the receipt, Cedar Hollow Cabins, a quaint little cluster of rental homes pitched as quiet escapes for couples, tucked just off the Appalachian spine. I'd driven past the exit a dozen times on work trips and never given it a second glance. Now I couldn't stop staring at the name. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there trying to remember every detail from the week leading up to her departure, every shift in her tone, every avoidant glance. I played back the small things I'd ignored, the sudden uptick in gym visits, the way she'd laughed too loud at a message that came through while we were watching TV, the moment she left her laptop open and yanked it shut when I walked by. I hadn't asked then, because I'd trusted her. Stupid. By noon I was on my laptop, pulling up their website. The photo was almost theatrical. A rustic wood cabin with soft orange lights glowing from inside, snow-tipped railing, and a bottle of wine on the porch table. Romantic. Isolated. Designed for privacy. I scrolled past the booking form, past the amenities, until I found the phone number. I called under the pretense of confirming a lost item. My voice was steady, polite. I said my wife had just returned from a stay but thought she left behind a scarf, maybe a gray one. I gave the name on the receipt. The woman on the line was helpful. Said yes, the cabin was booked 3 days ago under that name. She didn't mention a scarf. I didn't push. Before she hung up, I asked casually, was it just her? Or did she book for 2? There was a pause, subtle, maybe a breath, but enough to crack the illusion. I believe it was just the one reservation, sir. But we don't monitor guest activity. Of course you don't. But you just told me everything. That night, I pulled out the rest of the receipts from the duffel. One was for a local cafe near the cabins. I searched it online and checked their Instagram feed. They had posted photos from the day she was there, a barista smiling behind a heart-shaped foam latte, a couple standing outside near a fire pit. No clear faces. But in one corner, mostly cropped out, was the edge of a woman's coat I recognized. Forest green. Hers. I didn't need proof of the man yet. I needed the pattern. Next, I dug through our bookshelf. She had been reading a travel book, something about authentic solitude in America's overlooked towns. She had marked it with sticky notes and underlines. It read like a blueprint. I followed her notes from page to page, her handwriting in the margins, circles around cabins, waterfalls, roadside diners. She'd planned this like a pilgrimage. But solitude wasn't what she was chasing. The book was romantic, flirty even. Half the notes were about the best hidden spots for couples to reconnect. She underlined the words, secluded, low visibility, and off-grid cell coverage. What exactly did she think she was escaping? I thought about the last few years of our marriage. We weren't perfect, but we weren't broken, or so I thought. We still cooked together, watched documentaries, shared inside jokes no one else would understand. We'd gone through lean seasons, sure, but that was life. You push through. You don't bail the second it's not Instagram worthy. Unless, of course, you've been pushing in opposite directions the entire time. The next day, I checked our joint account. I hadn't planned to. I thought she'd be careful enough to use her own. But there it was, 3 withdrawals from an ATM in that same Blue Ridge town, spaced 2 days apart. A few hundred at a time. Not enough to look suspicious. Just enough to keep her hands off a card that could leave a trail. I cross-referenced the ATM's location, a gas station next to a small used car lot. I searched the lot's name and found they rented vehicles under a separate license, mostly to locals whose cars were in repair. The car keys I found in the duffel suddenly made sense. She didn't take her car. She rented one under the radar, parked it somewhere nearby, and drove to the cabin. Clean. No trace. Except the one she left in our closet. By the time the 5th day rolled around, she texted me again. I feel clearer now. I think this space really helped. She used the word clarity. Like she'd just returned from therapy. I stared at that text for a long time. Not because I believed her, but because I almost wanted to. Some part of me, maybe the part that still remembered her laughing in the passenger seat during summer drives, wanted to believe she was just lost, not gone. But then I remembered what I'd seen in that duffel. The lace. The toothbrush. The trail of money. Lost people don't plan like that. She wasn't trying to find herself. She was laying bricks for an escape route, and hoping I'd never look behind the curtain. But I wasn't playing house anymore. If she wanted a week to explore her freedom, I'd use mine to build the exit sign she didn't see coming. The morning she returned, she brought croissants. I was standing at the kitchen sink when I heard the front door open. She called out a soft, cheerful, "Hey," as if she hadn't disappeared into the woods with someone else's shadow pressed against her skin. I turned slowly, towel in hand, and there she was, hair slightly tousled, cheeks flushed from mountain air, holding a brown paper bag like a peace offering. "I thought we could have breakfast together," she said, setting the bag down like she was trying to land a plane without waking the passengers. She kissed my cheek. I let her. It wasn't forgiveness. It was calculation. That entire day played out like a scene from some marriage commercial. She laughed easily, asked about my week, mentioned a podcast she listened to on the drive back about communication in long-term relationships. Her voice carried the bright, breathy tone of someone who had rehearsed these lines on the drive home. I played my part. I smiled. I nodded. I asked if the time away helped. She said it did. Said she felt more grounded. Said maybe we should start hiking again like we used to. Said we'd gotten too comfortable. Said she wanted us to have goals again. Each word was a match dropped into gasoline. By the time we sat down to dinner, she was acting like we were newlyweds. She poured wine, lit a candle, and leaned her head against my shoulder as we watched a show we used to love. It was surreal, like watching a play while knowing the lead actress is having an affair with the director backstage. That night she curled into bed beside me and whispered, "I miss this." I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to her breath soften into sleep, wondering how long she'd been able to lie this well, wondering who taught her, wondering how many nights she'd imagined this bed while sharing another. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I catalogued. I always catalogued. The next morning, while she showered, I checked the safe. The box was there, but it was light. I opened it. Her wedding ring was gone. So was the envelope of emergency cash we kept, about $4,000. I flipped through the remaining documents. Our home deed, insurance policy. One detail made me pause. The beneficiary line on the life insurance used to list me. Now it listed her sister. She hadn't just planned for a week away. She had started the unspooling months ago. I drove to the bank before work, closed our joint account, moved half into a personal account under my name, as legally allowed. I transferred my direct deposits. I changed all online banking passwords and enabled alerts. She had opened the door to independence. I was going to walk through it before she could close it behind me. That night I made dinner. Chicken, rosemary potatoes, green beans with lemon. It was her favorite. She smiled when she walked in, leaned over to kiss my neck. I kissed her back. And all the while, I counted the days until I could sever the last thread. 2 more receipts surfaced the next day. She had left them on the floor of the passenger seat in her car, carelessly tucked under a reusable shopping bag. One was from a boutique wine shop in that same town. The other was from a pharmacy near the cabin, generic, unsuspicious. But both had timestamps matching the days I knew she'd been with him. And still she acted normal. Texted me sweet things. Picked up oat milk. Laughed at a meme I sent her. It was chilling. The ability to blend back into routine, to reoccupy the life she'd hollowed out like a burned-out barn, and still pretend it stood whole. I started leaving my own clues. Not sloppy ones, subtle things. I moved the framed photo of us on the entry table slightly off-center, every day, to see if she noticed. She didn't. I changed the passcode on my phone. She never asked why. I adjusted my work hours slightly. She didn't comment. Because she wasn't watching anymore. She had already written the ending. She just hadn't realized I was editing the final act. On the 4th night after her return, we sat outside. She was curled in a blanket, sipping wine, feet tucked under her like everything was fine. I feel like things are getting better, she said quietly, watching the trees. Don't you? I turned to her. Watched the curve of her jaw, the calm in her voice, the practiced serenity. I said, yeah, I think we're finally getting somewhere. And I meant it. But not the way she thought. She started humming in the mornings again. Little things, harmless things. She made smoothies, folded laundry. She sent me playlists she thought I'd like and curled against me on the couch like no war was underway beneath our roof. And maybe if I were weaker, or more desperate, I could have let that fiction breathe a little longer. Maybe even lived inside it for a few more weeks. But I'd already seen the receipts, the missing ring, the real destination of her freedom. And now, I needed to see how deep her reinvention went. On Friday, I went to the restaurant listed on the receipt from her trip. It was only a 2-hour drive. Cozy, upscale, the kind of place where everything came on a wooden board and the staff wore matching aprons and warm smiles. I walked in and waited. Ordered a coffee I didn't want. When the same waitress passed by twice, I nodded toward the far booth in the corner and asked if it was always that empty. She smiled. Usually just weekdays. Unless a couple reserves it in advance. That's when I showed her a photo of my wife. Innocent, casual. Her on a hiking trail, grinning. I said we were planning to come back, and I thought she'd been here recently. The waitress nodded too quickly. Oh yes. She was here just last week, I think. With her husband, or boyfriend. They were cute. Matching mugs and everything. Cute. Matching mugs, husband or boyfriend. I asked if they seemed familiar with the place. She nodded. I think they'd been before. She asked for a specific booth. That one. Of course she had. I tipped well, thanked her, and walked out with nausea crawling through my stomach like something alive. The game had changed. She wasn't escaping for a week of clarity. She was revisiting a relationship she'd carefully curated somewhere in parallel to our life. This wasn't some new man she met in crisis. This was someone she'd been circling for a long time. Someone who knew the same town, the same restaurant, the same booth. Back home, I sat across from her at dinner that night, watching her chew slowly through a bite of salmon like it was the most normal Friday on earth. Do you ever think about when we first met? I asked. She smiled without looking up. All the time. Do you think we're the same people now? She laughed softly. No one's the same after 10 years. But that's the point, right? Right. She didn't notice the edge in my voice. Or if she did, she masked it well. After dinner, I stepped into the garage to look for something, and took a long, slow breath. I stood there staring at the old tent we used to use before hotels and cabins became her norm. I remembered the way she used to grip my arm in the cold at 3 a.m., burying herself deeper in the sleeping bag, telling me I was the only warmth she needed. That version of her no longer existed. Saturday afternoon, I checked our mail. A packet from our insurance company was waiting, likely a summary of changes. I opened it, feeling that sick, tight pull in my throat I was getting used to. Her name, new beneficiary, confirmed. It wasn't just emotional betrayal anymore. She was rewriting the legal structure of our life behind a smiling face and shared coffee. That night, I texted a mutual friend of ours, a quiet guy, smart. The kind who notices things but doesn't comment unless invited. I asked if he'd seen anything off about her lately, anything unusual. I made it sound casual. His reply came an hour later. I thought you guys were taking space. I didn't know you were still together. The phrasing hit harder than I expected. When I asked what he meant, he said he'd seen her at a gallery opening 2 weeks ago, arm in arm with a guy he swore looked familiar, but he couldn't place the face. He didn't say anything because he assumed we were trying non-traditional stuff. That phrase made me laugh out loud. The first actual laugh in days. Not out of humor, something darker, something bitter. She wasn't just escaping. She was presenting something else, selling it to people as a new life, a new chapter. And I was the last fool clinging to the previous edition. I poured a drink and stared out the window that night while she slept. This was no longer a matter of heartbreak. This was positioning. She was building a narrative, making quiet exits from financial obligations, from shared connections, from legal tethers, one change at a time. I still hadn't confronted her, because the longer I stayed quiet, the more she revealed. She didn't know I'd spoken to anyone. Didn't know I'd stood in that booth at the Mountain Cafe, or closed our joint accounts, or memorized every timestamp from her getaway. She didn't know I was laying down my own tracks, right under hers. But the moment for silence was nearing its end. Soon I'd open the curtain. And I would do it with facts, not fists. She wouldn't see it coming, not because I was clever, but because she stopped believing I could ever be anything but trusting. She was about to learn otherwise. It started with a wine glass. Not the way you'd expect, not shattered in anger or dropped in shock. It was just missing. A single glass from a pair we bought in Sonoma. One of those indulgent purchases from a trip she said changed the way she saw life. We used to drink from them on weekends, quietly, in the soft hush between dinner and sleep. Now there was only one. At first I thought maybe it broke, but I couldn't find the shards. Nothing in the trash, no note of apology. I checked the dishwasher. Nothing. It was just gone. And I knew why. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in bed, watching her silhouette turn in and out of sleep, wondering how much of what we built she'd already mentally packed away. The bed. The memories. Me. All of it boxed up in a future where I didn't exist. So I began dismantling what was left, quietly, deliberately. I reached out to an attorney I knew through a college friend. Not a firebrand, just a clean, efficient man with a razor focus and zero appetite for drama. I sent him an email at 6:30 a.m. the following morning. 2 hours later, we were on the phone. By noon, I had begun the process of quietly protecting every asset in my name and preparing the necessary filings. I didn't tell her. Not yet. The mask she wore was still intact. Still humming through breakfasts. Still texting me heart emojis. Still watching TV pressed against my side like a woman content with her choices. But cracks were forming. Small ones. On Sunday afternoon, I noticed she was distracted during lunch. Kept checking her phone, flipping it over every time I glanced near it. She smiled less. Laughed on delay. Asked the same question twice in 10 minutes. She was slipping, still pretending, but sloppier now. I offered to take a walk. She declined. I offered to make dinner. She said she wasn't hungry. She was unraveling, just enough to notice, not enough to admit. That evening, while she was out, grabbing groceries, I checked her laptop. I wasn't snooping for emails or messages. I already knew what she was doing. What I needed was something else, evidence of intention. I found a document, untitled, hidden in a folder under old tax files. It was a budget spreadsheet. Not for us, for her. It included rent estimates for apartments in a nearby city. It included estimated moving costs. It included projected income from freelance work I didn't know she was doing on the side. And at the bottom, highlighted in pale yellow, was a note. Leave by August. Avoid legal tie-ups. Keep clean. I stared at that last line for a long time. Keep clean. She wasn't trying to repair anything. She was preparing an exit that left no smudge on her image. The next day, she invited me to a brunch her friend was hosting. Said it might be good for us to be seen again. Her words. Seen. I declined. I said I had errands. She didn't push. Probably relieved. That night, she asked me if I felt like we were moving forward. Her eyes held just enough concern to be convincing. I told her yes. She kissed me like she believed it. 2 days later, I had the last piece I needed. A text from a friend. He worked part-time at a co-working space downtown. Sent me a blurry photo. Said he saw my wife meeting someone there. Same guy from the gallery. They weren't being discreet. The photo was angled awkwardly, but even in grainy light, I could see her leaning across the table, smiling, genuine, soft. A smile I hadn't seen in months. And I knew this wasn't new. It wasn't a phase. It wasn't confusion. It was a relationship, built in the shadows of ours. I didn't confront her that night. Or the next. I waited. Because when I showed her what I knew, when I put everything on the table, I wanted to do it without raising my voice. I wanted her to feel the weight of it, unclouded by chaos. I wanted her to see what it looked like when someone really walked away. Not with a duffel bag and a weekend lie, but with finality. The morning I chose to end it, the sky was gray and soft, like something had been drained from it overnight. She was making coffee when I walked in, humming again, one of those tuneless little melodies she used to hum while grading papers or folding laundry. There was something almost insulting about the peace in her expression, like she'd forgotten the wreckage still lay beneath our feet. I sat at the table, watching her pour 2 mugs. I have something I want to talk about, I said, voice level. She turned, half smile in place. Okay. What's up? I didn't answer right away. I pulled a folder from beneath the chair. Hard copy printouts, organized, receipts, statements, a printed image of the photo my friend had taken at the co-working space. She looked down at it, confused at first, then still. She didn't move for a long moment. Then, softly, she asked, "What is this? You tell me." Her hand hovered above the coffee pot, suspended in some half-realized instinct to pretend nothing was wrong. I stood, walked to the counter, and slid the folder closer to her. I know about the cabin. I know about the man. I know about the account you opened in your name, the changes to the insurance, the apartment listings. I know everything. She leaned back slowly, her spine straightening like she was trying to reset her posture into control. You went through my things? No, I said. I went through our life, the one you started walking out of months ago. I just followed your steps. She stared at the folder, not opening it. You could have said something, she whispered. I almost laughed. You mean like the way you said you needed space to reset? Was that before or after you booked the cabin under a false name? Her eyes flicked up to mine, sharper now. You don't understand. I do, I said, cutting her off. I understand more than you think. I understand that this wasn't a mistake or a cry for clarity. This was methodical, calculated. You've been planning an exit and playing house until it was convenient. Silence. The only sound was the slow drip of the coffee pot behind us. She exhaled, eyes closing. It wasn't supposed to go like this. No, I said. It wasn't. She looked at me then, and for a moment, there was something real behind her eyes. Not guilt exactly, something closer to fear. Not of me, but of what was happening. Of what it meant to finally be exposed. You already filed? She asked quietly. I did. Her jaw tightened. You blindsided me. No. I just stopped pretending. She didn't cry. Didn't beg. She sat down and opened the folder, slowly flipping through the evidence like she was reviewing a stranger's mistakes. Maybe that's how she coped, by compartmentalizing, distancing. I couldn't say. You were always so good at details, she murmured. I didn't reply. After a long moment, she pushed the folder away and looked at me with a strange mixture of resignation and bitterness. What do you want me to say? Nothing, I said, keeping my voice steady. This isn't a conversation anymore. This is just the truth, finally spoken. She looked up slowly. What about the house? I've already protected my share, I replied. You'll get your portion. I won't contest the split. She hesitated, then asked quietly. And the rest? You'll be served the papers this week, I said, watching her face carefully. We can go through mediation, but I'll fight for what matters. She didn't ask what I meant by that. Maybe she knew. Maybe she'd known all along. She stood slowly, reached for her coffee, and paused. I never stopped caring, she said softly. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't believe her, but because it didn't matter anymore. Caring wasn't the same thing as choosing someone. And she'd made her choice long before this conversation. She walked out of the kitchen without another word. This time, I didn't hear the door close. I thought it was over. I thought exposing the affair, filing the papers, and watching her walk through that door in silence was the final page of the story. That all that was left now was division of property, long silences in lawyers' offices, and the slow, grinding road back to a life without her. But the story had one more chapter one hadn't seen coming. It started 2 weeks after the confrontation. I was in my office sorting through bank statements when my sister called. She sounded hesitant, like she'd rehearsed what she was about to say and still didn't like how it sounded. You remember that night, she said? About a year ago, when your wife stayed at our place after that weird argument? I did. It wasn't even a real fight, just a tense conversation about our plans for the future, and then she said she needed space and went to stay at my sister's place overnight. It seemed harmless at the time. A pause. She didn't stay here, my sister said. I never told you because I wasn't sure if it was my place. But she dropped her bag off and left. Came back just before sunrise. I felt the cold reach my fingertips. She said she was taking a walk, but she wasn't dressed for it. She had makeup on. Perfume. I thought it was strange. It wasn't strange anymore. It was a pattern. That night marked the beginning of her withdrawal, subtle, at first. A distance I chalked up to stress. I remembered how she acted the next day. Overcompensating, warm, almost too present. I had taken it as reconciliation, a moment of repair. Now I realized it had been guilt, not the reactive kind, the practiced kind. After that call I dug deeper. Not emotionally, strategically. I went back through our shared cloud storage. The automatic backups from her tablet she forgot were still synced, buried in an old folder labeled Docs Archive. I found a series of PDFs. Some were spreadsheets. Some were notes. But one was a letter, addressed to him. It was never sent, or maybe just never deleted after she typed it out. Dated 8 months ago. Long before she asked for space. Long before the cabin, the wine shop, the duffel bag. The letter read like a confession, a thank you for waiting. A promise that she'd find the cleanest way out. A line that burned into me like acid. He's still too trusting. He thinks we're fine. I just need a few more months. That was the real betrayal. Not just the affair. Not just the planning. But the months, the entire year, where I had fought to make something work, while she was quietly engineering my removal like a hostile takeover. And then came the worst of it. The man she'd been seeing? I finally remembered where I'd seen his name. He wasn't just an old college friend. He was the roommate of someone I used to know. Someone who, years ago, had briefly dated my wife, back before we ever met. I remembered the name from a story she once told, dismissively, like he was nothing. Tried too hard, she'd said, clingy. I dodged a bullet, but she hadn't dodged anything. She'd circled back, maybe out of nostalgia, maybe out of fantasy, but she'd chosen to build a second life with someone she once mocked in passing. And she did it while laying in bed next to me, laughing at our shared shows, making me believe we were just tired, not over. That was the real twist. It had never been sudden. It had never been a crisis. It was premeditated erasure. A slow-motion betrayal carried out with a smile, disguised as routine, buried in the familiar. She didn't just cheat on me. She rewrote the story of our marriage, while I was still living in it. And I had loved her every step of the way.